Welcome to Aquarium 911, where I help you with your aquarium problems. This is Bentley, and today we're going to go back to an issue that we have kind of seen previously, and the person who emailed actually took some of that advice and used some of those steps before I got to their email. So we do have a follow-up, but there's a few other lessons I want to point out potentially in this email that we didn't necessarily cover in the previous one, and this is about hair algae. Let's get to Bruce's email. Dear Bentley, my name is Bruce, and I am replying to your Let Me Help You With Your Aquarium Problems segment. I have a 75-gallon aquascape, and I have a hair algae problem. Plus, I need some advice on lighting, since I am using two Fluval Plant 3.0 LED lights on the tank. Personal favorite of mine. I'm actually super excited to get my hands on the 4.0, because based on what I've seen with the Aquaskyes, which are these two tanks down here, right? So Running River used to have an Aquasky 2.0, now it's running on an Aquasky 3. And our little guppy experiment, they're so hungry, they're just begging like crazy, is also on Aquasky 3, used to be on the Aquarium Co-op light. So I've been doing my testing on these two tanks so far. Nice upgrades. So I'm really excited for the plant, but the Plant 3.0 used to be my favorite bang for your buck light as far as getting higher level of quality than a lot of the stuff that's out there and a lot of control. Back to the email, though. I'm rambling again. What do you expect? It's me. First, the aquascape has been running since October of 2024. The hair algae appeared about 3 months ago. And so it was 3 months. This email was sent in July, so 3 months before then. April, right? I do math. Did you smell the smoke? I did visit the aquarium shop at a later date and noticed that their tanks had hair algae. He had introduced some new fish after the hair, and kind of shortly around there is when the hair algae appeared. Usually transferring fish doesn't bring hair algae. I mean, if you had like a tiny strand of hair algae somewhere in the bag that got into your tank, and then that somehow latched somewhere and started growing, I could see that, but the likelihood of like introducing new fish causing algae is kind of low, unless we're introducing quite a lot of new fish and we had a significant spike in the amount of food we're feeding without any other changes. And that's usually where I've seen some problems like this occur, but we'll keep reading. Regardless, I believe that I was running my lights way too high and for too long. Attached is a zip file that contains photos, my Fluval Plant 3.0 light profile, and a city water quality report. This is like the most in-depth water testing I've received, because if you haven't ever gotten a water quality report from your city, if you're on city water, they test everything under the sun, and they probably give you more information than you would ever need as an aquarist, unless you're really crazy. Like this dude. Information on my aquascape follows. Water testing was done with API test kits and a TDS meter. The tank is a Clear for Life 75-gallon Uniquarium, 48 inches long, 18 wide, that's front to back, and 20 high. So pretty standard dimensions for a 75-gallon with a built-in biological filtration system. That's cool. I like some of the tanks that have built-in ones. Like almost all my acrylics have some kind of built-in overflow to get to their filtration system, and I generally like those. And things like the Fluval Flex and lots of kit tanks have built-in filtration systems, and they can be really effective. So it's just kind of a matter of like, some people like them. I tend to be one of those people. Other people do not, because they want their own custom solution. I think they're fine. The water source is city tap water, using Fritz Complete as the water conditioner, Nylock G Thrive as a fertilizer, two Fluval Plant 3.0 LEDs, the 48 to 60 inch variety, because we're using a 48 inch tank. Both have the same lighting profile, which is right here. The lights sit 4 inches above the top of the tank, so they're suspended up. We're using risers. I'm a big fan of using risers with these lights. It really does help spread the light a little bit better, things like that. Also, it makes maintenance slightly easier just because they sit that touch higher. The ones that I'm using, I'm trying to think. I have, I think, a 3-inch riser over there. And for a while when I had a 3.0 here, I think I also had a 3-inch riser. I think I've found like 3 inches kind of like my go-to on 40-gallon breeders. But on a 75-gallon, I think like 4 or 5 inches is probably pretty good. And I think similarly when I was using the Aquarium Co-op lights, look at this thing for a second. I think I'm only using, I have like one 2-inch and one 3-inch riser, if I remember correctly. Or maybe they're both 3-inch. You can estimate. On task, Bentley, on task. GH, so general hardness, 8 drops. So 8 degrees of general hardness. The TDS for that is typically, I think it's something like 160? It's kind of a guess, but that part doesn't matter. 8 degrees is really all we care about. 21 degrees, 21 drops for carbonate hardness. You have all the buffer in the world. Your pH is buffered until the end of time. That's a lot. But it's not necessarily detrimental. Maybe consistent with the Water City report. Yeah, and it depends. Your city could be adding a buffer in there for a number of different reasons that naturally increases the KH quite a bit, or it could be location of where you live, things like that. The water, their source they're drawing from before they do their treatment. Who knows? pH is 7.8. Ammonia, 0 ppm. Nitrite, 0 ppm. Nitrate, 10 ppm. Not the worst, but that is a little low, which makes me believe that potentially because we're dealing with a hair algae problem, we might have one thing that's kind of out of control and not enough of some of the other nutrients to help the plants naturally fight that off. So that might be where our hair algae has been taking advantage, is like maybe you've got too much phosphate, or maybe you've got too much of this or that. You know, they can't really feed off the carbonate hardness so much, but there could be something that's just a little out that they're able to feed on. Oh, you have a phosphate test. Phosphate, 1 ppm, so it's not phosphate. Or at least it's unlikely to be phosphate. 1 ppm is low enough to where I usually don't freak out. Temperature, 80 degrees. Total TDS for the tank is 500 parts per million. Relatively hard water overall, which you're gonna see that with the carbonate hardness that you have, but if your plants are doing okay, not too much of a stress. Using CO2, a 5-pound tank lasts about 5 weeks. The CO2 cycle is from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m., so we're getting about 6 hours of CO2, which starts before sunrise and starts before sunset light settings. Without looking at your light profile, you're doing 6 hours where the CO2 is. You had mentioned previously that you might have too intense light for too long, and I'm gonna guess that too long isn't our problem. I think intensity is probably our problem, or at least is a part of our problem. Because often fighting algae, we make adjustments one at a time to help slowly find where we're building our balance back, because if we adjust too many things at once, it's really hard to track which is giving us success and which isn't. But when it comes to algae, often what I have found is it's not a singular thing that's out of whack. It's typically a couple of things that are creating this complex problem that is helping the algae thrive and may not necessarily allow the plants to do their job. Like, you could look at my guppy mansion over here. I'm not going to film it because I'm slightly embarrassed. I've got a blackbeard breakout that's happened, and I about every 18 months I have a blackbeard breakout in this tank. It depends on when the city does their big flush. They do 2 flushes a year. I think I've talked about that, other water pipes. And even though they do a really good job of flushing everything here, there is still some level of shift in the nutrient levels that are naturally in the water, where I just inevitably get, especially in this tank, a little blackbeard breakout. But I do feed kind of heavy in that tank, or at least I historically have. I've really cut that down because there's nowhere near as many fish in it. I always get with some kind of blackbeard algae, and I just have to fight it off every time. And right now it's like some of my poor crypts are look like they're wearing froze. I might have to give you guys a short video just so you can see it, because it's kind of funny looking. But the Crypt Sri Lanka, the really long crypt, it's just kind of waving there. It's got this big old fro thing going on. And so it'll just have a little puff on the top. I think it's hilarious, personally, the way it looks. I almost sit here and appreciate it, but I realize long-term, it could actually cause problems with the plant health, so I typically fight it off. My wife loves it, though. So, yeah. Back to email. Water changes, 15 to 20 gallons once per week. So we're doing a really light water change. And that could lead to the buildup of nutrients that is letting something kind of come out of balance, combined with that light, that could be really the true source of our algae problem. So here's what I want to keep you guys with me. Is this is how I problem solve in real time, right? We're worried about intensity and duration of light. Your CO2 is on for 6 hours, and basically the only thing after that period of time, because it's starting before your light goes on, and it's going until right when your sunset begins, which is typically what I do with most of my CO2 when I have fluval lights on any kind of level of auto or pro mode. What this tells me is that 6-hour window, duration is not our problem. It's probably a combination of intensity, the way that we're doing our fertilizer, and the amount of water we're changing. Now we're sitting pretty low on nitrates, right? And that's great. And our phosphate doesn't look too out of whack there, but we might have something else that algae is finding as a food source. Or it's very potential that the reason why the phosphates are only about 1 ppm, and while that's not perfect, it's not scary to me. And some people are probably like, 1 ppm phosphate in a planet tank, people will freak out. To me, that's not that scary because plants do need some level of phosphate. But what could be happening is the plants and algae together are consuming enough that when we test it, it looks like it's at an okay level. But there's actually kind of a phantom amount of phosphate present, and that's what the algae is using to grow off of. That's almost like conspiracy level theory thought process, but I just want you to come on the ride with me and understand where I feel some of the problems are. I think we have some nutrient imbalance happening, and it could be because of the way we're fertilizing, not because of the fertilizer we're using. Now, algae is great, but it might be the way that we're fertilizing and how much we're putting in, or how little we're putting in potentially, versus the intensity of the light compared to what the plants actually need in that aquarium. So this is where where my brain's headed, but let's dig a little deeper. After watching your videos on algae problems, I made 2 changes last week. Lowered both lighting profiles by 10% for pink and the whites, but the blue remained at 3%, which 3% is pretty low. I think that's great on a 75. A lot of people will say that that's just like wives' tale level, that blue causes blackbeard algae. But I've seen it a lot. I've seen blue kind of accelerate algae growth if I push too much blue light. Maybe that's just like a level of perception bias, right? Because when I've had higher amounts of blue is when the algae outbreaks have happened. It might not have anything to do with blue. Because if you ask people like Tom Barr, that's a wives' tale, right? It's all mumbo jumbo. But for me, my experience is whenever I push blue light higher in my aquariums, I have algae problems. And almost always for me, it's blackbeard. That just happens to be really prevalent in my water, and it tends to be the most common outbreak I get in my tanks when I have algae outbreaks. But back onto your problem. Increase the liquid fertilization from 4 pumps per week. Okay, so there we go. We were doing 4 pumps per week. So we were doing less than what I think the recommended dose is for the Nyloc G, because I think the Nyloc G is very similar, or maybe it's 1 pump per 20 gallons on the Nyloc G Thrive Plus. I can't remember off the top of my head. It's been a long time since I've looked at a Nyloc G bottle, but I think we're either close to or we're half the recommended amount. But basically, my thought is because we're using CO2 and we're only doing that much, we're probably under fertilizing. Even though that CO2 is not on for a long period of time and you're going through a 5-pound canister on a 75-gallon once every 5 weeks, that leads me to believe you're pushing a reasonable amount of gas. Not a lot, but you're pushing a reasonable amount. For some reason, 5 pounds seem to go out way faster than like if you had a 10-pound. It's not like it'd be like, oh, if I went to a 10-pound, it would last 10 weeks. I don't know what it is. Again, this is like confirmation bias. Every time I've had a 5-pound canister, it feels like it doesn't last nearly as long. It's probably me being crazy. Let's be honest. Back on task. I'm all over the place today. I'm sorry, folks. This week, I am moving to 2 15-gallon water changes per week. So now we're increasing the amount of water we're changing by anywhere to 50% or double, right? We were potentially changing somewhere to 15 to 20 gallons per week. Now we are doing 2 15 gallons per week. So we went from somewhere between 15 and 20 to 30 gallons a week, roughly. And I think that's going to help. I might almost dial that up a little bit, just to be certain, especially with the change in fertilizer from 4 pumps per week to 2 pumps per day, right? So I get what you're trying to do now. So that's another thing, right? So it was previously 4 per week. Now you're going to effectively 14 per week. So we're having a significant increase in the amount of fertilization, which goes in line with my thought that we're under-fertilizing given that we're using CO2. But this is all before we have the follow-up email. I do have a follow-up email. We'll get to it. In conclusion, reducing light intensity and duration has helped greatly in reducing the hair algae as it started to take over the tank. I am looking forward to any suggestions that you might have. I'm happy to answer any questions. And then we've gone through this big file of the pictures he supplied. Let's recap what the actions that I would have taken. You had a concern about intensity and duration of light. But with 6 hours being the amount of time your CO2 is on, and that's basically going from start of sunrise or just before sunrise all the way until sunset begins. Unless your sunset is like 6 hours, 6 hours of light is not too much if you were to ask me. My guess is you're getting somewhere between like 7 and 8 total hours of light that are direct from your Fluval 3.0s. But you have 2 of them, and this is where I think the intensity question becomes. You did dial that down, and I can literally see on the peak from the second email that you dialed it down a bit more potentially. When we do 2 lights, here's one of the things to think about. We're often looking at coverage, right? Because front to back, you're going to have more light spread than that 120 degree angle that the fluvals cover, right? Because even if you look at like this tank here, right? This Aqua Sky has the same 120 degree spread, but you can kind of see that the front is a little bit dimmer because of the position. And if you look all the way to the back, you can definitely see a section kind of under where the filter sits along the back wall. And it might not be perfect for this camera angle, I understand, but I can see a section that's at least a couple inches deep that is dimmer. significantly dimmer. So even on a 40 gallon, which is kind of similar, it's 17 inches front to back. It's more like 16 if you want to be really on it, right? We're getting dim spots. So when you go with multiple lights, what you're doing is you're spreading them out to help spread that light, but you have that center column basically that is going to get not exactly double the intensity. It's not like as if you had a single light at, let's say it was at 50 and now it's the same as a single light at 100. It's actually kind of slightly more than that. And I know this doesn't sound, this is not like perfect math or anything like that, but in general, because you have two light sources and you have this crossover, as the spread comes out, it gets into some of the strongest portions of the other light, so it does create significantly more light because it's coming from a broader surface, a broader source of light. And there's nothing to really soften that, per se. This would be like if we were talking about camera lighting, there's ways to spread the light source out even more. But what's happening is you have two rows of fairly intense lighting that are merging at center points. And what that does is it kind of has more of a, not exponential effect, but a higher multiplier effect. It's not just times 2, it's kind of like times 2.2. It's just a little bit more, but it is increasing compared to if you were to have a singular light at, say, double the intensity by a very minimal amount. And that's mostly because you're having a lot of extra diodes producing light, and the way that the light is just interacting with the water, it kind of causes an extra effect. Now, it looks great. It looks great when we're looking at our tank, but this is where we can get into that intensity of light being a problem. So as an example, if you were using auto mode and your max was 75 on a single light, rather than saying going to like 50 to try and cut down the light quite a bit, what I would be doing is something closer to like 40 on both lights. Because that center region, and it might get a little dimmer toward the front and the very back, and that's okay. But that center is not getting quite as bombarded with light, unless you have extremely high demand plants, like some of your crazy Rotalas and a lot of the stems that are very, very demanding, that like really intense light. Think things like Rotala Florida, Litibigia White, Litibigia Tornado, Rotala Orange Juice. A lot of these things like very bright, very intense light. If we're not dealing with plants like that, we're going to bring it down a bit more than we might think, because that doubling of light, right, the two diode sets of light actually creates a stronger light than if you were to have higher intensity on a singular light. So it's just a little food for thought there. We had CO2. We were only doing 4 pumps per week. That's probably too little given that we're giving CO2, which is leading to some kind of imbalance where algae is taking over and the plants aren't being able to grow and fight as much as possible and consume as many things as possible, because while they have the carbon available, they don't have all the extra nutrients they really need. So upping those extra nutrients is going to be probably one of our most effective tools. And tool number 1, this would be one of the cases where I'd make 2 adjustments at once. It's rare. Usually I try to only adjust 1 thing at a time. This is one of the ones where I would do 2, just because to me it's such like a glaring thing. And then finally, we're talking about water changes. We could fix this too. We could basically do 3 changes all at once. And my thought here is that I would look to change 25% twice a week or 50% once a week. It depends on your personal schedule if it's easier to do 2 smaller water changes. And the only reason why I say this is you've changed it to 2 pumps a day. You've changed your fertilizer to 2 pumps a day. So we're basically tripling. It's slightly more than that, but we're effectively tripling the amount of fertilizer going in. There is a risk that kind of sudden shift, the plants can't quite kick into gear fast enough to handle that change, and you could have a different or bigger outbreak occur for a temporary period of time. If I were handling this at the same time, I would basically bring down my lights probably 50% on each, depending on how intense we had it. But I would take a significant downturn on the light, because I want to take away a lot of light from the algae. The plants can probably handle it. Then that fertilizer change, great, but the water change thing is something I would address. I think either 25% twice a week or 50% once a week. I really want to pull a lot of the potential excess nutrients out in 1 shot, if possible, or 2 shots over the time. But because we're also going from 1 big dose of fertilizer to a little bit every day, that keeps a kind of leaner nutrition sitting in the tank at all times. That's going to be better for the plants, should help kick them into gear, make them grow faster, more dense, all those wonderful things that we want when we have CO2 in a tank, but minimize the risk of massive outbreaks, because we're not seeing that big spike in nutrients and then slow tail off as it consumes, spike in nutrients, things like that, right? This is my general approach for most tanks when I'm trying to fight off algae, or more importantly, just make it so that I have a kind of proactive way to minimize the likelihood of algae outbreaks in my aquariums, where I'm getting, much denser with plants that need that kind of fertilizer regime if I'm using CO2. So let's go to your follow-up email, because you pretty much followed my battle plan anyway. Bentley, I did not hear back from you on my hair algae problem. I know, I'm getting a ton of these things. I'm trying to catch up. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I thought I would give you an update on my positive progress. I love that part, positive progress. By lowering the fluval light settings, doing liquid fertilizer daily, hand harvesting algae to kind of keep it under control, and doing water changes twice a week, the hair algae has significantly reduced. Also, my cleanup crew has been working away at algae in general in the tank. Thank you for all your advice. So just looking at the final setting for each light right now, we're in auto mode for 8 total hours. I guess without looking, we're capping out at about 40% for all our whites. Reds look like they're about 30. That looks like 30, and then the blue at that 3% with a little curve to it. Looks like you got kind of similar to one of my auto settings that I like quite a lot. Very nice. This is kind of what I would call like my shallow auto setting. It's very similar to what you're running, if not exactly what you're running for. Depends on the tank. I like this light setting. It's good. 8 hours of light is great. 6 hours of CO2 with 8 hours of light. I like that. I think that's good. That gives enough time for the CO2 to build up a little bit, but also for that CO2 to ramp down while there's still a little bit of light, so you're not putting too much gas and potentially risking anything with your fish. So you're on positive. The only thing I think you would change at this point is potentially upping the amount of water change. And the only reason why we would do this is we would use that extra water change level to be kind of a proactive preventative to minimize the chance of a buildup of nutrients. Like say you do a really big trim in your tank. If you got a lot of stems, stuff like that, whatever, maybe you're like what I did here where I removed just tons of Java fern and you know, this isn't like a complete cluster mess anymore over here. And I thinned out a lot from the front here and even a little bit in the back. I removed probably like 55% of the plants that were in this tank. This thing was really overgrown. By doing that, the consumption of nutrients that is occurring in that tank has gone down by 55% or so, roughly. Let's just say cut it in half. If I kept fertilizing the exact same way as what the tank needed before, but I have 50% of the consumption, for now, it will grow, but I had 50% of the consumption. All of a sudden, things are gonna start creeping up. And that's where there's a chance of risking new algae outbreaks. So what we do to kind of act as an extra buffer against that is we have a slightly more aggressive water changes. So if we only like changing, say, 20% at a time, we're gonna look at like doing 30% at a time. We're gonna up that quite a bit. If we were doing 1 water change a week and we were only doing 25%, we need to do 50 on that 1 water change. Your fish can handle it, your plants can handle it. It's just a little extra time, especially on a 75 gallon, it takes a little longer to fill up. But I think if you increase that water change level just a little bit more, I think you'll see a couple of things happen. One, I don't think you'll see that algae ever have a chance of coming back. It can, but it significantly reduces the likelihood, right? It helps maintain that balance by diluting some of that nutrition so it doesn't get to build up. And what we want is we want the plants to keep consuming and consuming and consuming. That's great, but what we want to make sure is that we're also diluting some of it to protect ourselves in the long run. We kind of don't touch anything else. Light's doing right, nutrition's doing right. We just up that water change amount because we're going to keep that nutrition coming in. We're always going to have that nice, lean, consistent amount. We got that nice timed in light. We found that dials in really well with the amount of CO2 we're using. Perfect. Just dial up those water changes a little bit, and I think what you'll see is you'll finally capitalize on what progress you've made and get rid of that algae to where it's basically non-visible. It's gone, it's mitigated completely. However, the important part is long-term, minimizing the risk of future outbreaks, especially when you do trims or if you decide you want to make some changes in the tank. Those extra water change levels will help dilute that nutrition load a little bit more and make it so the likelihood of anything building up becomes effectively zero. Bruce, thank you so much for your email. I'm glad you're finding positive success based on some of the previous videos, but I kind of wanted to touch on those couple extra things because these extra steps are our feedback about how we do this long term to continue that success and get to where we want to be. A beautiful planet tank, relatively algae free. You can never permanently fight algae. You always have little bits of dust algae and things like that will happen, but you'll get it to a point of where it's easily maintainable and doesn't turn into outbreaks. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a like, leave a comment down below. How have you handled hair algae in the past? Do you use my method? Do you change like 8,000 things at once? Do you just go remove it all, nuke the tank with some kind of algicide and hope it never comes back? Or do you take the more careful, measured approach, like this weirdo on the internet right here? If you're not subscribed, consider subscribing, doing tons of these Aquarium 911s, all sorts of other things. We've got lots of other videos coming up, guides for the new Fluval. Aquasky 3s are coming. I'm working on all my testing now so I can get you guys some new settings, new review, all that kind of stuff coming very, very soon. So subscribe if you haven't. Also, like, comment, subscribe. 3 free ways that tell old Papa YouTube, hey, I like this, someone else might too. Helps all of us small YouTubers grow and continue doing what we're doing without having to take all these crazy aggressive sponsorships where I don't have to like scream at you about Raid Shadow Legends or some dumb S like that. Or I don't know how many of you have seen like things for Magic Spoon or Z-Biotics or some stupid bed or clothing company or what. I hate all of them. I hate all of them, and I don't want to ever have to do that. So thank you for making it so I don't have to. If you need my help, there's a link down below to how to get into the Aquarium 911 program. I don't know if it was really a program, but just understand I am kind of behind. I'm trying to catch up. I really appreciate everybody's patience. As always, my friends, thank you so much for watching, and stay awesome.